Black Star was founded in Philadelphia
in a lineage of global anti-colonial struggle
on land which has been stewarded by the Lenni-Lenape people for centuries.
We call in our Black, Indigenous, and Brown ancestors
who bent time and envisioned a freer, more tender world for us, one that we continue to reach for.
We honor all Indigenous peoples and their lands and acknowledge the ongoing genocide and displacement of Indigenous and Black communities.
Merely naming the people of this land is not an act of repair, nor is it a form of decolonization.
After all, decolonization is an unsettling thing.
We use this reminder as an opening
to consider ongoing self-determination movements of colonized people across the world,
from Palestine to Puerto Rico and everywhere in between.
The violence inflicted on our communities is immeasurable and irreparable.
Still, we gather in the spirit of generous and joyful exchange and other cultural expression.
As Tony Cade Bambara has shown us, through cultural work, we create space for imagination,
critique,
gathering,
pleasure,
love,
and radical care.
Welcome, everyone. Hello. Oh, Tom, I don't think I'm on screen. Welcome, everyone, to our virtual audience, and thank you for participating in the 11th Annual Black Star Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. I'm Farah, the panel producer here at Black Star, and it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Sultana Isham. Sultana Isham explores sound as biology through film composition and ethnomusicology. She's a composer and interdisciplinary fellow at the Sundance Institute, and her recent film score, The Neutral Ground, premiered at Tribeca and was broadcasted nationally on PBS, earning her an IDA nomination for Best Score in 2021. Sultana's film composer credits include the Black Star selection All Skinfolk and Kinfolk, directed by Angela Tucker, and Ailey, directed by Jamila Wynyo. Her upcoming score for the miniseries Making Black America, hosted by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., will broadcast nationally on PBS in the fall of 2022. It's my pleasure to introduce Sultana.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you for having me on this panel. I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. Before we get started, I would like to introduce the panel and also share some clips about the films that we will be discussing today. First up, we have director and producer Lisa Taouma. She has made her mark in the industry by bringing Pacifica storytelling to the big and small screens. With a variety of screen credits to her name, including the flagship TVNC program Fresh. Lisa also created the popular online portal, the Coconet TV, the online home of Moana content. as well as a raft of short films and social justice documentaries looking at issues across the Pacific. Lisa recently produced the popular feature film anthology Tanerélle, The Ancient Ones. Marks of Mana, the award-winning documentary on female tattooing, and the documentary series Untold Pacific History. Lisa prioritizes the brown gaze of Kapapa and particularly a brown female gaze of Oceania. We're also joined by Mario Naoa, who is an actor, director, and producer who has spent the last 30 years in film and television and theater. He has a particular focus on Indigenous film and storytelling. So now we're going to share a clip of their anthology series, Tanerélle.
They are the protector of the old world. They guard our ngafa, and if you soli the va, you can't interfere with the will of the Tanerélle. So don't you go and trample on the va.
Okay. Especially not in those shoes.
And next up, we're joined by another dynamic duo. We have Tanerélle, who is a space-age songstress, writer, and actress, independent artist from Atlanta, Georgia. After getting her BFA in acting, she has remained in Los Angeles and can be heard on Spike Lee's She's Gotta Have It, Issa Rae's Insecure, Netflix Raising Dion, NBA 2022, and most recently lent her severe sounds to co-score Nikyatu Jusu's acclaimed horror film, Nanny, which received the coveted Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in January. Her music blends genres, speaks volumes of love and embracing the human experience, and includes elements of space that create a one-of-a-kind sound. We're also joined by Nikyatu Jusu. Short films have been screened at festivals nationally and internationally. Her Black vampire short film, Suicide by Sunlight, premiered at Sundance Film Festival in 2019, garnering her representation at both CAA and M88. Nikyatu's first feature film, Nanny, debuted at the 2022 Sundance Film Festival, where it won the Grand Jury Prize for U.S. Dramatic. Nikyatu is the second Black woman director, and Nanny is the first horror film to be so honored. Nanny opens in limited theaters November 23rd and streams on Amazon Prime Video December 16th. She is in development on her next feature, acquired by Universal Studios and Jordan Peele's Monkey Paw Productions. And now we can show a clip from her upcoming film, Nanny. Yes, so thank you everyone for being here. This is going to be a great conversation of sound and horror. But before we start, I would love to know how you guys met. You know, film is very collaborative. We are all working together to support a big story. So I would love to know how you both met. I guess we can start with Mario and Lisa.
In a professional sense, we met. Well, because in Aotearoa, where we come from on this part of the world, we're very new to the screen industry. Pacific people have only recently been able to get our image making on main, commercial screens, and in this part of the world, and that's only happened really in the last 10 years. And so a lot of our collaborations have been, because it's such a young industry here, there's so few of us, we all know each other. And so especially working in this anthology form where there's, oh my gosh, every person under the sun and all those roles that we had to fill, we wanted to be Pacific people. So we created this huge tapestry of artists and people to bring into this project. But Mario and I have known each other for a long time professionally, because the industry here, the Pacific industry, is relatively new in terms of other Indigenous people around the world, perhaps.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon to work here in New Zealand as a filmmaker or as a storyteller, and meet people that you're very familiar with, and collaborate with them maybe 3-4 times within a year. And that's just to sort of like show how small our industry is over here comparatively to you guys.
Yes. And how about you, Nikyatu and Tanerélle?
You know what? I hope Tanerélle can tell. I don't even remember how I first poked her, but I knew about Tanerélle because of her aesthetic. She's gorgeous. Her soundscape, her sounds reminds me of Octavia Butler in this beautiful package of Tanerélle. But I can't remember how I first reached out. But I first reached out for a song. And then we ended up collaborating for the soundscape of Nanny. But Tanerélle, I don't know if you remember exactly how I reached out, but I don't remember how we reached out in the first place.
I remember. I have very great memory. It's a good thing, sometimes bad. But it was very briefly during the pandemic, actually. There was an artist. Yeah, he was the drawing for. Wait, I can't hear Nikki.
Wait, let me mute this second. My doppelganger, my tether. I'm gonna mute my tether.
Oh yeah, there.
Wait, I muted the
Definitely.
one that is actively moving in speed. So I'll keep them both. Can you see both, Tanerélle? Don't be distracted by the second. How do I mute the second one? Because
Okay, so to mute the second one, there is an icon on the right. It says
yeah, I
toggle camera.
clicked toggle camera preview and it's keeping the slow one up.
Oh goodness, yeah, I do notice the delay. Is there anyone at
Yeah,
Black
I
Circle?
see.
Ignore
Yeah,
me,
I see the
Tanerélle.
whole
Forge
other.
ahead.
Okay, I just love looking at it. Okay, so so during the pandemic, there was an artist who had drawn some sketches for, I believe, Mami Wata, and
Yes.
had referenced my face in that character, and was telling me all about Nikyatu, all the wonderful things, and connected us. And that was our initial connection. Just that small, like
That's
little
what it
connection.
was. We modeled the
Yes, it was.
figure of Mami Wata after Tanerélle because she's gorgeous,
Yeah,
and um, our concept art for Mami Wata in this live action version was initially, yes, this concept artist did model the face of Mami Wata after Tanerélle. That was the first way I think, Tanerélle, you knew about me, but I knew about your music before this. I knew I wanted your
yeah,
sound in Nanny. I just didn't know, what that entailed yet.
yeah. I wouldn't. Who would have thought it would get to this? But yeah, that was our initial connection, and then the second was like I got an audition for Nanny for the lead, and I was
Yes.
like, I
You're
reached
talking
out
to
to Nikyatu,
Nikyatu?
and yeah, I'm thinking this is fucking
So I
amazing. I mean, can I? on here. Freaking amazing. But I knew that the project deserved authenticity because of the artist that I had learned of Nikyatu to be after like doing my research and watching her past art. And I was like, I'm not gonna be able to learn this accent in time. I'm not gonna, but this is amazing. Congratulations. Like I just got the script for, like the audition. Is there any ways I can lend anything at all musically? Just let me know. I was just thinking like a song or two. I never dreamt score like ever. So it was a dream for sure.
It was truly a dream.
Yeah, I love that story. And that brings me to my next question because both of your works really center deities, folklores, indigenous folklore is like really prevalent throughout both of your projects. You already named one of them. There are so many, and I have like my own personal connection to it after watching the film Nanny. But it's so both projects beautifully display the diversity of our cultural regions and our connections with each other, specifically for folklore and sound. So I was curious for all of you, like, why is folklore important to you? And we can start with Lisa.
It's really important to Pacific cultures. That's because all our deities are living ancestors. We're all related in some way, shape, or form. This is our living ancestral references. So it was really important to treat those deities in a specific way and to get permission from the different cultures to do these representations. But folklore, I mean, we sort of use the terminology aitu and atua, which rather than the conventions of the words horror and maybe folklore as well, and because it's a very spiritual realm. And it's really, really important to us as a decolonizing narrative on this part of the world, because the stories that we've tended to have on screen have been things like migration stories or stories that are very assimilatory. So what was very unique about this project was putting the narratives that we put on screen in anthology form across the region for a start, because often people see people from this part of the world as one homogenous group. I'm sure that's the same with many island groups, also are in different parts of the world. So it was really important to have one uniting theme across all the islands to present on screen, and the stories of our atua and our aiku and those female deities are a thread across the Pacific that have never, ever, ever been given any time or space on screens, or even in published works. Like even the research for this project, bringing to life these narratives again was very difficult. But folklore and spirituality in that sense is the common thread that connects us all as Moana people and Indigenous people. So we were so blessed to be able to be funded to present these narratives for the first time on our screens and to our own people.
I would say for me, a lot of my influences, Toni Morrison. I mentioned Octavia Butler, Zora Neale Hurston. There's a lag again. Is it a lag happening on your end?
There is, but we can hear you. And I think that's most
Okay,
important.
I'm just gonna ignore my face. So I think that it's important to acknowledge the magic beneath the surface of everything that we're maneuvering, because Toni Morrison has a really poignant quotation that kind of guides my work, which is, and I'm not going to quote it verbatim because it's not in front of me, but it's important to keep a hold of the magic in spite of the trauma, in spite of what we're navigating in this dystopia. And that really informs everything that I speak to in terms of my work. And as was mentioned, Black and brown people, Indigenous people, we have these different iterations of the same folklore. Mami Wata has different iterations in different cultures. And we live in a culture in the United States where American cinema is morphing before our eyes. And so we're allowed to see different perspectives around what the American experience is. It's not monolithic. It's not one thing. It's not myopic anymore. New voices are being ushered in. And so Mami Wata is just as much of an American folklore as, the things we're conditioned to believe are very American. So although we're tasked with introducing these characters to the American cinematic paradigm, in Tanerélle, in my case, I think these folkloric heroes are just as significant as what we've come to learn are important in history. I'm gonna refresh
Yeah,
again.
Yes, it's interesting that we're talking about, Lisa, you were talking about the difficulty with recovering this information. I do a lot of that work myself as an ethnomusicologist. I study folk music of Louisiana, and a lot of that can be very challenging, mostly because of the imperial construction of publishing is very difficult. And I'm just wondering the specificity of that struggle for you with recovering something that is, I guess, inaccessible on the internet, but is that shared mostly through oral?
Absolutely. I mean, we come from a really strong oral culture, and also with the oral cultures in the modern world, a lot of that knowledge has been lost. So we have different forms of recording. Our tatau, our tattoo is there's lots of there's story in everything. There's story and motifs, but uncovering that in a way that is authentic to the actual Pacific cultures, because we're all different. I mean, that's a big process, especially when you're dealing with what we call tikanga, which is when you're dealing with people's, what's the word for tikanga? Like their precious knowledge, the precious old knowledge. So yeah, it was a big process, but it was a really exciting process because, there hasn't been the opportunity to do a lot of due diligence. And there's, like you say, I know that it's a huge thing across the world, that knowledge, Indigenous knowledge and the way it's recorded and the way it's reflected is such an issue for all of us. So in doing this, and it was really interesting for new generations, because these are stories, and we're relatively old people now, but for all the new generations coming through, like I forgot the lack of access that they've had to all these stories. And so it was like opening the vortex for them, and they were so fascinated. What I love about it is that this film and the 5 stories, the value of an anthology, it allowed people across the Pacific and young people to start their own conversations online about all these deities and this old knowledge, and it became like the bones of a universe that everyone started filling in online, because then lots of questions were asked of all our historians, and it created this fantastic online canvas of information. So not only having these stories on screen, but it's had a fantastic spin-off in the reawakening of a lot of ancient knowledge about our female deities, because they were the first ones that the missionaries chopped off their heads. And
Mario, do you want to chime in?
It's funny how these stories. Stories are heavily entrenched within us, even though we haven't heard them for years on end. And then it's when someone presents it in front of you, it brings back a flood of memories of your grandma or your mother telling you these stories to keep you in line. And that's something certainly that the Tanerélle anthology series done. So online, if you read online, if you watched it online and you saw the comments that were popping up, there's just thousands of people just remembering those exact stories that were put in front of them. And we're sort of like, this is a modern world. So it's, it's easy to get caught up in the today things. And, when you're storytelling, when you present something that's remade or refashioned, or in a lot of cases untouched, but they're heavily intrinsic to who you are as a person, as a culture. It's easy for that story to make sense, and it connected a lot of dots for a wide audience, certainly across the South Pacific and into the Northern Hemisphere as well. So, a very interesting journey and very telling journey for us as well.
Nikyatu, was that similar for you with recovering these very ancient patakis of different deities across the diaspora? Or was it something that you grew up with knowing? How was
What's
it
the
like
question?
for you?
Remind me of the question for
Yeah,
this.
so I was asking about recovering these stories, recovering these anthologies have an imperialistic nature where sometimes it's not accessible to us. So I was wondering what was your process like with recovering this information of lost love and also deities in your storytelling in your film?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just refreshed. I don't know. I wasn't able to troubleshoot my webcam. I don't know what's going on, but um, yeah, it wasn't so much recovering. It was more of figuring out how to ingratiate what I was familiar with. I'm Sierra Leonean American. My family, I know my tribal affiliation. I'm Mende, Sherbro, Madinka, and so it was like figuring out how to introduce these entities to the American cinematic paradigm in the live action form more so. Like what does Mami Wata feel and look like? What do they sound like? Because Mami Wata kind of encompasses multiple genders in these water spirits, and Tanerélle was pivotal in terms of bringing a voice and a sound to Mami Wata in particular. And Anansi is a figure who is very prevalent in many cultures, and so Anansi, the trickster figure, Native Americans have their trickster figures. Brer Rabbit was a very prevalent trickster figure amongst enslaved people, Black people in America. So these figures had different iterations. So it wasn't so much how to excavate what they meant, but more so how to introduce them in a way that made sense in our film.
Yeah, both of you had a similar relationship for basically creating the score for these deities. It was very apparent to me in the audience. I really enjoyed in Nanny how there were human voices that I heard in the score that were used almost when the character needed some strength, some energy um, to fight adversity. I've noticed that also in the anthology as well, the sounds that you associated with certain deities. So Tanerélle, can you share with us your composition process with voicing the unseen?
Yes, it was. First of all, it was just a very kind of cathartic experience because a lot of the vocalization was tapping into those parts of myself that was connecting with the character, or even like the clip that you all did see, the wailing and the screaming and the crying was very much tapping into my experience as a Black woman in America, um, or what it would be to be a Black mother in America and losing a son or these things that happen to us. So it was exhausting. It was a bit very emotional, and also with like my co-composer, it was a very intricate, intimate experience for him as well, because he's Polish. So I'm having to do like pretty much go through this process in front of him as he's recording everything. Um, and those are like the parts that people don't see. Like I'm kind of getting a bit emotional thinking of it. Um, because there's no correct way to do it. Like it's not like, okay, in this this is like the proper way, and how about we do this on this note? It was all about feeling. And I think that you hear that in the score, and you feel that it was more about, we didn't want to, and it was very important. Like Nikyatu made it very, very clear that we didn't want to manipulate our audience with sound. We don't like want to trick you into being afraid or scared. The topic at hand is terrifying enough. Um, and so that's what we brought to it in terms of that process and using heavy vocals throughout the entire composition.
So it sounds like you did become a Miwata, like you actually are Mama Wata.
A bit, I would
Yeah, I
say,
totally.
yeah. It
Yeah,
was
I
very
definitely.
heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, I can relate to that. The first film that I ever scored was a horror film, actually, and it was all about very similar topics, honestly. It was directed by another Black Star alum, Dandishu Brown. It's called Blood Runs Down, and it's all about mother-daughter relationships and the complexity of that. And yeah, I definitely hear what you were saying about it being a very cathartic experience. You know, the film was tackling also mental illness and all these and paranoia and all these type of things that we deal with. And it definitely brought me to that place. And even the things that were going on in the movie were mirroring my own life. So I was wondering for all of you, what was that process? Because people don't really see that side of the work. They only see what was right in front of them. And the journey that we don't film shows up on film. So can y'all talk about because all of you are in different positions. We have directors, composers, actors on this panel. So what was it like for all different dimensions of this work, this story playing out in your everyday lives as well?
Yeah, well, for us, like as Mario mentioned, we've grown up with certain behaviors that our grandparents especially taught us around these ancient deities. And we, like, for example, in Samoa, we are taught from day dot to always cover the mirrors at night, because the moonlight and if your mirrors aren't covered at night, then there's a chance that the Tanerélle is going to come through the moonlight, and it's all connected to the moon. And, you know, like all the natural world will take you over, basically. So growing up in Samoa, these are all the things that were part of our lives, and we never necessarily knew the backstories. We were just taught all these behaviors to do. Don't comb your hair in the moonlight. Don't go and, don't wear the red flower at night. And a lot of it, in the process of making this film, how it informed it was kind of like unraveling what some of the behaviors we were taught as kids meant, and then we realized how much it's connected to containing female sexuality as well. It's basically what we decided was Samoa's best method of birth control was to terrify all the young women into not having these behaviors that were essentially sexual behaviors that were connected to the sexuality of our female deities. So I think, if that's the question, like a lot of the behavior we brought up with has informed the work. In one of the pieces, Matasila, who comes from the Solomon Islands, a very small island called Raviana. So she brought the story of her family and her family ancestor and what that meant, and how these and it was the behaviors that she had been brought up with too. So again, it's demystifying all these things on screen. But I just wanted to make the point about the sound that you referred to before in this conversation, is that for us, and in the use of words and in the soundscape, in the same way that Nanny has, and very, very similar elements. That was a deliberate thing on our part too, to get our language on screen, because we have so many languages in the Pacific and we never hear that, we never see that. And so it was part of the modus operandi of having this decolonizing narrative, is to put, and we don't often see on our screens the different shades of brown and black in the Pacific, you know, so it's creating those canvases. But in the composition and in the scores, and there were 5 different ones, we really wanted to have a common vein of having language and the sounds of our language, you know, in these spaces. I think I went way off topic, but that was part of.
No, I want to talk about this language and sound. Yeah.
And I
Mario,
love
did
the
you have anything
synergy,
to say?
you know, with the nanny film. Amazing.
I'm sorry, Mario, we can't hear you. Or at least I can't.
We can't hear you.
My bad. My sound came back, and I missed your whole question. But that's all right. I just want to take a second to say that the clip you showed of Nanny and the sound score inside there, oh my God, it's terrifying. Well
That's
done. You're
Tanerélle.
freaking me
That's
out. You're on the right
Tanerélle's
track. Yeah,
voice. Yeah.
yeah, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can we talk a little bit about that? The moments when the characters were finding a strength, resistance. You know, these deities, it seemed like it gave them the power to see their rage as a superpower as opposed to a weakness. Something that I recognized in Nanny, which I would love to hear Tanerélle talk more about, is those moments when the character was standing up for herself and the sounds that you used for that. And also in your series, Lisa, talked about hair a little bit. And I know that hair for our regions is a really, really big deal. And there is a theme of like covering your hair. And when you show your hair, it's like you're mourning or you're tapping into your strength, which are very common themes across both of our regions. So I guess, Tanerélle, can we talk a little bit about how you use sound as a source of strength for the character?
Yes. So in the beginning of the film and kind of towards the moments before she is able to embrace the reality of what's happening and turn that into her power, the score is very it was important to me that the score was able to reflect what it was like being, again, a Black woman in this country, right? So I had to tap into what that feels like, and it feels like my skin crawling. It feels like suppression. It feels like suffocation. It feels like a spotlight. You're always aware of the color of your skin, literally in every second of the day. So it we intentionally did that to kind of allow the audience to feel that too, this like microaggression of white people in this country. The it just is what it is. Um, in terms of that turn of embracing the rage and what was actually happening, it's kind of like breaking the dam and just kind of allowing release and the liberation in that rage, because we are always taught to be so strong. That's supposed to be like the kind of like that's our best feature as Black women. We're strong. You can get through it. You're strong. So it's like, what about actually, which Nikyatu did such a beautiful job of directing and writing in, seeing a character be able to show what that is. And it was, again, cathartic because I got to, probably for the first time, embrace what that sounds like in my voice of like letting go of that trauma, releasing that trauma, sounding it off in order to like keep living instead of like suppressing this sound, which we do so much. We suppress our cries, we suppress, like, when's the last time you like wailed? I mean, like really just like, and so I feel that was the process for me. It is the wildest thing to imagine how much this work was that therapy, was like embracing and facing a lot of stuff that I didn't even know was a thing for me or maybe didn't exactly want to face. And so that's what it was. It was discovering these parts of myself and navigating those things in order to bring it to the screen to support the beauty of everything that was already going on, and to not like overtake it, but to make sure that it was something that could genuinely be felt, something that I don't think like instruments can really mimic. You know what I mean? It's kind of that the true rage of a Black woman.
Yeah,
Oh
it
my God, I
sounds like
love
it
that.
was very, yeah, I love that too. I relate to a lot of what you were saying. And I think it's interesting because both films explore people's fear with our strength. And I think that's why telling these stories with this genre horror, because creates a lot of possibilities. I love seeing our people in horror telling these stories and navigating through this. It really is very cathartic, as you were saying. Mario and Lisa, same thing, like for the characters, when they were tapping into their strength, we heard a difference, we saw a difference. We saw the difference with the different, or we heard the difference with the sounds being represented in the score, and also the visual aspect of that with the, I think it was the next to last one where the character, the little Black girl from Melanesian, when she put out her afro and she was channeling that power and everyone was terrified of her. How would you describe that sonically and that transition for her tapping into this deity to get a sense of strength?
Very similar to what Tanerelle's saying in The Nanny, because the idea, it's about women coming undone in the Victorian sense, because we've been so colonized by the British here. And so it's all about containment, containment of our hair, containment of our rage, containment of our voice. And so the visual idea with all of them is there's a big thing in Tongan culture at funerals where when they're grieving their loved ones, you pull your hair out and you're literally pulling your hair. And it's that idea of coming undone, but the way that we wanted to present it is becoming unleashed. And so it's an interesting correlation between the hair and the soundscape. So, in a lot of it, it's becoming your natural, the power of your natural being. And so I think that's reflected throughout the entire anthology. And the soundscape with it is this idea of unleashing. And in a lot of the soundscapes, there's so in Hiyama, the one you're talking about, where she basically embraces her rage. Mata wanted to use a soundscape with these castanets that it's I'm saying castanets, not really. It's like they're Melanesian shells that are tied around the ankle, and so when a lot of women move and dance, you hear the shaking of the shells. And the goddess that she references is a centipede god as well. So it was the sounds of centipedes and this rattling. And so we wanted to bring those sounds from the natural world in, that represent the unleashing and going back to this primal natural world, and embracing that rage as a power. I mean, such similar themes, but also what underpins the anthology as the unifying theme as well in the Pacific. So we've got this concept of the va. It's called the va, and it's the space between. And it's not necessarily a dividing space, it's a space that connects us. So it's the unseen space that connects us all. And it's about relationships. So how you have healthy relationships in your va. So that underpins the whole thing. And the world of our ancestors sits in that space. So it was like, what does that space sound like? When we are, all the films are referencing this space, the unseen space. And so it's bringing the sounds and the noises of our ancestral voice, and I don't know, I'm trying not to sound too new age wanky, but it's like, that's a real thing for us. So, and because nobody had done it before in the Pacific, it was the freedom to investigate, to dream up, the freedom to dream those sounds, and to create them.
Yeah, I really was resonating with what you were saying. Did it influence the direction? Like when we think of or when many people think of horror films of the dominant filter, the instrumentation is pretty different. Like I'm a violinist, like I grew up playing the violin, but in my scores I incorporate many sounds, not just limited to man-made instruments, but also, like you said, noise, because there's such a strict conditioning of what exactly is real music and, like, I guess, poor people, folk music, that type of thing. So I was wondering, what was that mixture? How would you describe that mixture of instruments of the dominant filter with instruments of our indigenous ancestors? Was that a collaboration between two? How would you describe it as a collaboration between two of these different regions of sounds? Nikyatu?
I'm the questions are like passing through my brain, and I'm like, am I processing what she's actually asking? The kora was a prevalent instrument for us. I stressed to both Tanerélle and Bartek that I wanted Sierra Leonean sounds specifically, is specific to my tribes, Mende, Sherbro, Madingo, and I didn't want I didn't want the entire film to have a traditional horror soundscape, because we hear the strings and we hear the violins in almost every American film that is on the path of being pedigreed and being prestige films. Like, you always hear a very similar score. But I wanted West African sounds, but I also wanted not to flatten West Africanness
Right.
to meet the American audience where they are. Like, I wanted to be specific with my tribalism and where I come from. And so both Bartek and Tanerélle were so amazing about incorporating the breathlessness that Tanerélle utilized and spoke so eloquently and beautifully towards, as a Black woman in America, that breathlessness, like always feeling in predominantly white spaces in particular that you're holding your breath, or that you can't breathe, or that, etc. Ad nauseum. This breathlessness was a motif, but also the kora is a motif, because it's such a specific instrument that has a history and a lineage. And I'm interested in remixing the American horror soundscape. So, these are elements that we played with.
Mario and Lisa?
I was just gonna chuck in there. Sort of similar. On set for me, we decided quite early that we wanted to include sounds that were, pretty much manufactured by our actor. And in the Pacific, there's a number of sounds that cross over. So it doesn't matter if you come from Samoa or from Niue or from Tonga or from Hawaii. There's specific sounds that translate through all those islands. And one of them is, in the Samoan sense, I don't know if you can hear, so can you guys hear that? So if you walk along, if you go through LA or New York or anywhere like that, and you go, only the islanders will turn around and have a look and go, hey, someone's calling me. It's like
Men
a
in
universal
Cuba
call.
cat call like that. Men in Cuba, I'm sorry, this is like a random. Men in Cuba, I'm sorry, when I hear that sound, I'm like, it's a sound that's prevalent. I'm sorry to interrupt you with that. I'm so sorry. That was
no. I stand corrected, because now it's now Pacific Islanders and Cuban men. So that's part of the reason why I bring up this story is sounds like that is what we ended up including in the soundscape for the chapter that I done. So this is another sound that's like, if you're in trouble with your parents, a lot of Pacific Islanders will go. So there's a lot of nothing but, and then that's for a short passage of it. That's all you'll hear. And as a Pacific Islander, when you're watching that and you're listening, straight away, hey, that sound. Am I going to get a hiding? Something bad is coming. So when we do layer other instruments on top, there's not very much, because we did want the primary source of design to be the natural sounds that we were all familiar with. So yes, there was a mix inside there, but certainly there was a focus, a strong focus on having some of our sounds playing predominantly inside there as well, which worked a treat.
Yeah. So Tanerélle, this was your first film that you ever scored, or is this just
My first? Yeah.
your first? Yeah, this is a great first. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
This is a great.
Nikyatu, again and again.
You don't
Yeah,
have to thank me. I want
I
to thank
have
you.
to. I'm just like,
I want to thank
honestly,
you.
it feels so surreal now. You know, my IMDb has composer on there now. I'm like, that feels. It just
Oh
feels so.
yeah.
You deserve,
And
man.
it feels very like one of those, like, it's a huge reminder of you can't miss what's yours. You can't miss what's for you. And I feel especially like just such a huge honor being someone, like, there are people who go to school for composition. There are people who like dedicate their entire lives to music theory. And I feel for myself, a lot of times I have like kind of downgraded or not downgraded, but underwhelmingly acknowledged like the gift of just the ear and like
Yeah.
the feeling. And sometimes I have felt, I'm trying to find the right way to word it, but sometimes when you're watching other people and what other people are doing, it's very easy to feel like you're not that important. And
Mm.
I feel like sometimes when you have a gift, because some things may come to you, not that anything, well, I don't have to put a disclaimer to that. Because some things may come to you easy, it can be easy to feel like you're not working hard or that you don't deserve the things that come to you. Instead of just acknowledging, like, no, this is a God given gift. And it's also a gift to be able to be a conduit, to be a clear channel for God
Yes.
to filter through. And so this was one of those experiences where there were times when it felt surreal or that I did not deserve it. And Bartik was so lovely and so affirming
Hmm.
in validating my gift. Like, he has been in school, one of those people forever for it. And like, he's an incredible mentor and friend to me. But he was always just so blown away. Like, you don't need to, like, I'd be like, maybe I should get some, I was buying all these music theory books and all this stuff, and he had to pause me one day and he was like, Tanerélle, his voice is so adorable, but he was just like, you don't have to do, his voice is, it's so adorable, but he was like, you don't have to do all of this. You have this and you have this, and that's more than some people can ever say. So you just have to trust that. And so it's just been such an honor and it was such a journey. And it's very exciting because sometimes in life, when you're not booking things or certain things are not coming through, I've now realized with this, like, it feels better to, this was my first and it's the only one right now, but for that to be the first instead of having like this whole chain of, I did all these things that you now have to sift through to go, well, what were the things you were the most proud of? And I liken it to acting, like, I don't have to book a trillion roles for that one. I know like that'll be the same way of like, oh, that was her first, and it's going to be what it's supposed to be. So it's nice to know, like, to just keep pouring into that gift of being a channel and a conduit and allowing things that are supposed to be flow in instead of feeling like everything has to be such hard work. Like, honestly,
Yes.
as a Black woman, honestly, I am looking forward to things just flowing in and knowing
Yeah.
that that's okay, that's deserved. We deserve to just have things come how they're supposed to.
I feel like a proud mom watching Tanerélle talk about this process because, as we spoke about before we went live, so much of the film industry, particularly in America, is about Are you vetted? What have you done before this? In order to garner the next job, you have to have this long body of work to speak to this job. But how do you get the body of work if you're not given the opportunity? And it's a blessing to collaborate with people who understand the craft on a visceral, instinctual level. And I guess I'm one of those filmmakers in this industry who's hoping to write and direct the content that allows artists like Tanerélle to expand the scope of her work outside of, you know, being a musician. Are you now you have a score, you know, in your arsenal, and now it speaks to the next piece of work that you can contribute to. So I think I'm just so lucky to have had you as a collaborator, and I want to work with you for the rest of my career. So we'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Me too. I can't wait.
Love fest. Yes, I'm sorry. Next question.
We love here. This is all about collaboration. Lisa, did you want to add something to that? I think you're on mute.
I'm just so buzzing off, you know, the joyousness of your relationship, which is a wonderful thing. And that's, you know, how, especially, you know, for a woman of color that's to operate in. And it's really inspiring. Mario is one of the few men that worked on the Tanerélle trilogy, but, you know, it's about honoring those relationships in those spaces too. And I love that you guys have that. And it's really apparent.
You know, the thing is, we have to find it, like, especially it's a job in itself, right? To find these bridges amongst each other and to convince the powers that be that this is who I want to collaborate with. I don't care that this is on what is quote unquote a certain path that has to be vetted. And usually what vetted means is white men and white people in general. Is like, you know, what you're presented with as a filmmaker tends to be white people because they have been given the opportunity to be vetted and to be given the opportunity to have the body of work. And so it's always an extra step as an artist to find your tribe in these industries and fight for them to get the CV and the resume and the body of work so that they can get the next job, so that they can be perceived as having been vetted. I think that that's a whole other conversation in itself.
It is. And you can be vetted, you can be classically trained, you can play multiple instruments and still hear that voice in your head.
But what does it like? What does it mean to be vetted? What does it mean? What is classically like? I think people. I'm having all these meetings where I'm sure people are sick of me doing this, but I'm like, what are we actually? Who is defining these things? I think that's the bigger conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think we have a good idea of
The
who's
thunder
defining
is
these.
underscoring my point. I don't know if y'all can
It's
hear
the
me.
same on this
Yeah,
side
I
of the
can
world.
hear.
It's all the same. I do this all the time. I love that.
Right. I'm like, my fingers are getting, I'm just gonna like
I did this
tattoo air
morning.
quotes on my temples. Right.
I did this
Like,
morning for sure. I'm
what
like,
are we talking
the
about?
good guys.
Right.
Love an air quote.
Me too.
Yeah. So we only have 2 minutes left. I know Mario has to go soon. We do have one question, I guess, from the audience that we can share as we close out. Someone says, from Essence London Q says, on pulling in sounds from your cultures without flattening them for the audience, could someone speak about how certain terrors may be lost or taken subconsciously because of the culture gap?
Did you say how certain terrors?
Yeah, I'll read it one more time. On pulling in sounds from your cultures without flattening them for the audience, could someone speak about how certain terrors may be lost or taken subconsciously because of the culture gap?
Very quickly for ours, we spoke to it before. Mario referenced it, and that it is playing into the audience's subconscious because this film was aimed at brown audiences specifically. So we are in the soundscape. We had deliberately wanted to use sounds and sound and noise and music in a way that would be familiar, even if it was subconsciously familiar to that audience. And we weren't too worried about the nuances of that being lost.
And in a funny way, I think a lot of our culture lends itself naturally to the horror landscape, which is quite funny because on the flip side, I feel that a lot of our culture lends itself also to comedy. So there's two there's two crazy things that are happening here. We love to laugh and we love to cry. And the crazy thing about Samoans, if you take Samoans to a horror movie, they laugh their heads off, and it's not to say that they're not scared, that we're not scared. It's a bit of a coping mechanism, but we certainly love our horrors and we love our comedies, and the soundscape between the two are vastly different, but certainly our culture lends towards those two genres.
Tanerélle, Nikyatu.
It's always hard for me to answer questions without asking questions back. Like what cultural divide? I mean, fear is fear, and who knows who knows horror better than Black people in America? Who knows horror better than Black women in the world? I'm not even gonna flatten it by saying women of color, Black women in particular. And so those of us who understand horror the most, I think, are the best equipped to showcase it.
Tanerélle, you have anything that you want to add before we close out?
That was perfect.
I agree. I agree. Well, I guess that will be the end of our panel. Thank you so much all for being here for this conversation. I love both of these works. As we said earlier, Nanny will be in select theaters soon, and it'll be on Amazon Prime. And Tanerélle is also on YouTube, and it'll be premiering here at Black Star Film Festival as well. Nice. Congratulations to both of you. I highly encourage everyone to see these wonderful, wonderful projects. So thank you all for having us, and we will see you later.
Thank you for having us.
Lovely to meet you guys.
Congrats to y'all.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
amazing.
everybody.
Yeah.